Hello, fellow explorer. I'm glad you found your way here. Welcome to Midnight Explorations, a quiet place for gentle journeys and deep rest. Tonight, we'll follow voyages across vast expanses of ocean and hear tales from the high seas. For the next little while, there's nothing for you to do and nowhere for you to go. Let the day fade into the distance and focus on getting comfortable and breathing deeply. There is something about the ocean that calls to the human spirit. Perhaps it's the vastness, water stretching to the horizon in every direction, blurring the line between sea and sky. Perhaps it's the mystery, what lies beneath the waves, what lands exist beyond sight of shore, what creatures move through depths where sunlight never reaches. Or perhaps it's simply the challenge, the way the sea tests anyone who ventures onto it, demanding respect, skill, and courage in equal measure. For thousands of years, humans have answered that call. They built vessels from trees and reeds and launched them into the unknown. They've navigated by stars and waves and birds, crossing distances that seem impossible without modern instruments. They've discovered new lands, mapped unknown coasts, ventured into depths where the pressure would crush any living thing not adapted to survive there. These are stories of ocean exploration, of the first people to cross the Pacific, the Vikings who reached America 5 centuries before Columbus, the circumnavigators who proved Earth was truly round, the scientists who revealed what lives in the deepest trenches, the solo sailors who spent months alone with nothing but water in every direction. Some sought wealth, some sought knowledge, some sought simply to see what lay beyond the horizon. The shape of Earth was known to educated people long before Magellan. Ancient Greeks had calculated Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy. But knowledge and proof are different things. One thing to read in a book that Earth is round, another thing entirely to sail west and arrive from the east, to circumnavigate the globe by following your nose, so to speak, trusting that the ocean will eventually bring you home. Magellan's expedition provided proof that anyone could grasp. You can sail around the world. This was not theoretical geometry, but lived experience, bought at terrible cost in lives and suffering, but undeniable once completed. Sometimes the most important discoveries are not new facts, but confirmation of old theories, the transformation of intellectual knowledge into physical certainty. Tonight, as you rest, let these tales of ocean voyaging carry you gently towards sleep. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly, deeply, like the rhythm of waves, and follow us across the water, where adventure and wonder have always waited for those brave enough to sail beyond sight of land. The ocean is patient, the ocean is eternal, and the ocean has stories to tell. Close your eyes now and imagine the ocean, not the beach where children play, not the harbor where boats rest, but the open ocean, water stretching beyond sight in every direction. The horizon curves away, reminding you that Earth is round, that you are standing on a sphere surrounded by water. The surface moves constantly, waves rising and falling in patterns that have repeated for billions of years. Beneath that surface lie depths that dwarf any mountain, trenches that plunge 7 miles down into darkness and pressure that would crush steel. The ocean is older than humanity, older than mammals, older than dinosaurs. It has witnessed the rise and fall of continents, the dance of tectonic plates, the slow evolution of life from single cells to the complex creatures that swim through it today. And it will be here long after we are gone, patient and eternal, keeping its secrets in the deep. Let us begin with the first great ocean voyagers. Long before Europeans ventured beyond sight of land, Before compasses and sextants and charts, the Polynesian peoples were crossing thousands of miles of open ocean. They navigated by reading stars, waves, and currents, carrying their entire culture aboard double-hulled canoes to settle islands scattered across an ocean that covers nearly a third of Earth's surface. These were the first great ocean explorers, and their achievements remain remarkable even by modern standards. Navigation without instruments seems impossible to modern minds, yet Polynesian navigators achieved precision that rivals GPS. They memorized star compasses, not the fixed stars we use for navigation, but the rising and setting points of stars throughout the year. Each island had its own star path, its own sequence of stars that would pass directly overhead when sailing from one known location to another. At night, they steered by these stars. During the day, they read the ocean itself. Swells, the long, rolling waves generated by distant weather systems, maintained consistent direction for hundreds of miles. By feeling the rhythm of swells against the hull, a navigator could maintain course even when clouds obscured the sky. They watched birds, knowing that certain species returned to land each evening, their flight paths pointing toward islands beyond the horizon. They observed cloud formations. Certain clouds form over land, creating pillars of moisture visible from great distances. They noted changes in water color, in the types of floating debris, in the species of fish encountered. Every detail contributed to a mental map of the ocean, a map carried in memory and passed down through generations of teaching. Our journey begins with the settlement of Hawaii. Around 800 CE, Polynesian voyagers from the Marquesas Islands set out on a journey that would take them over 2,000 miles northward across open ocean to a chain of islands they had never seen. How did they know these islands existed? Perhaps they didn't. Perhaps they simply sailed north with faith that something lay beyond the horizon, reading signs in the ocean itself that suggested land ahead. The voyaging canoes were masterpieces of engineering, double hulls connected by a platform, capable of carrying dozens of people plus food, water, animals, and plants for establishing new settlements. They were sailed and paddled, requiring constant management in the shifting winds and currents of the open Pacific. No metal, no modern materials, just wood and fiber and the knowledge accumulated over generations of seafaring. These vessels represented generations of accumulated knowledge about ocean engineering. The double-hull design provided stability that no single-hulled vessel could match, essential when carrying entire families, their possessions, livestock, and plants across thousands of miles. The hulls were carved from massive trees, shaped with stone tools and coral abrasives, fitted together with cordage made from coconut fiber. No nails, no metal fastenings, everything held together by lashing and expert joinery. The platform connecting the hull served as living space, cargo area, and working deck. Sails woven from pandanus leaves caught the wind. Steering was accomplished with large paddles at the stern. The entire vessel was a marvel of appropriate technology, perfectly suited to its purpose, reliable, repairable at sea with materials carried aboard. Modern yacht designers studying these ancient vessels have been humbled by their sophistication. Computer models show that Polynesian canoe designs achieved near optimal performance for long-distance voyaging under sail. What appears primitive to casual observation reveals itself as elegant engineering when properly understood. Every generation stands on the shoulders of those who came before. The first Polynesian voyagers who crossed to Hawaii faced the unknown with only their courage and whatever navigation techniques they developed in shorter journeys. But they learned. They noted which stars remained visible at northern latitudes. They observed how wave patterns changed. They discovered which birds indicated land, and when they returned, some of them returned surely to carry messages between the old islands and the new. They brought this knowledge home. The next generation of navigators started not from zero, but from this foundation of hard-won experience. Over centuries, over countless voyages, the knowledge accumulated, refined, crystallized into a navigation system so sophisticated that it allowed routine voyages across thousands of miles of open ocean. No single genius invented Polynesian navigation. It was the work of generations, each building on the last, each adding their observations to the collective wisdom. This is how human knowledge advances, not through sudden leaps, but through patient accumulation. Each generation learning from the last, adding their own small insights, passing everything forward to the next. The navigators watched the stars, memorizing their positions and movements across the sky. They read the waves, feeling how ocean swells changed when influenced by distant land. They watched for birds. Certain species fly from land in the morning and return at evening, their flight paths pointing toward islands beyond sight. They tasted the water, sensing changes in salinity that indicated freshwater runoff from land. The journey northward took weeks, perhaps months. Imagine it, day after day of nothing but water, the sun beating down, storms that could capsize even a well-designed vessel, the constant need to bail water and manage sails and ration supplies. Children were born on these journeys. People died and were buried at sea. The canoes pressed on, trusting in the navigators' skills, in the signs they read from ocean and sky. Weather at sea is both friend and enemy. Sun provides warmth and vitamin D, prevents the wet cold that saps strength and morale. But too much sun brings sunburn, heat exhaustion. The slow dehydration that comes from sweating in equatorial heat with limited water supplies. Wind fills the sails, drives the ship forward, makes progress possible. But too much wind tears sails, snaps masts, capsizes vessels. Rain provides drinking water, cools the heat, washes away the salt crust that forms on everything at sea. But storms bring waves that dwarf the ship, lightning that can shatter a mast, winds that blow with force enough to lift grown men and hurl them into the sea. Sailors learn to read the sky, to sense the coming weather hours before it arrives. They watch the clouds, the color of the horizon, the behavior of birds and fish. They learn that weather is not something that happens to you, but something you must work with, accommodating its moods, using its power, avoiding its fury when possible, surviving it when avoidance is impossible. When they finally reached Hawaii, they found a paradise. Volcanic islands with freshwater streams, forests full of birds, rich soil for farming. They made landfall, unloaded their cargo of taro and coconuts and pigs and chickens, and began the process of settlement. Over generations, they developed a unique culture, adapted to these specific islands, but always remembering through chant and story the great journey that brought their ancestors across the open ocean. Imagine making landfall after weeks at sea. Your eyes, accustomed to endless blue, suddenly see green, the green of living plants, of forests, of life flourishing on volcanic soil. You smell earth, flowers, freshwater streams. You hear birds singing, sounds you haven't heard since leaving your last island. Your feet touch solid ground that doesn't move beneath you, and for a moment you feel dizzy, your body still expecting the rolling motion of waves. The relief is profound. You have survived the crossing. You have found new land. And now the work of settlement begins, the work that will turn this place into home. Hawaii, when discovered by Europeans 1,000 years later, was already home to a sophisticated civilization, one that had been established by navigators whose skills would not be fully appreciated until the 20th century, when scholars finally began to understand the complexity and precision of Polynesian ocean voyaging. Sailing even further, these master navigators discovered New Zealand. The Polynesian settlement of New Zealand, Aotearoa in the Maori language, represents perhaps the greatest navigational achievement of these ocean voyages. Around 1200 CE, canoes sailed southward from the Society Islands or the Cook Islands, crossing over 2,000 miles of ocean to reach islands that lay in temperate latitudes, far from the tropical Pacific most Polynesians knew. The journey south was different from voyages to other Pacific islands. The weather was colder, stormier. The seas were rougher. The stars visible from these southern latitudes were different from those familiar to navigators trained in tropical waters. Everything about this voyage pushed the boundaries of Polynesian seafaring knowledge. The cold was a new enemy. In tropical waters, hypothermia is not a concern. Fall overboard and the water is warm enough to survive for hours. But in southern latitudes, the ocean grows cold enough to kill in minutes. Storms bring rain that soaks through clothing, wind that strips away body heat, waves that drench everyone aboard. The navigators had to adapt their techniques, their clothing, their entire approach to sailing. The knowledge that worked perfectly in warm waters needed modification for these colder seas. And they figured it out through trial and error, through observation and adaptation, through the same ingenuity that had allowed their ancestors to settle the Pacific in the first place. Consider what it means to sail into the unknown. The Polynesian navigators heading south from tropical waters had no guarantee they would find anything. They might sail until their food and water ran out, finding only empty ocean. They might encounter storms their canoes couldn't survive. They might discover land too hostile to support life. Yet they went anyway, driven by curiosity or necessity, or simply the desire to see what lay beyond the horizon. This is the essence of exploration. Not knowing what you'll find, accepting the risks, going forward anyway because the pull of the unknown is stronger than the fear of failure. Why sail south? Perhaps population pressure drove them to search for new lands. Perhaps oral traditions spoke of islands in that direction. Perhaps simple curiosity drove some navigator to wonder what lay beyond the southern horizon. Whatever the reason, the canoes went south and they found land. Aotearoa was unlike anything Polynesians had encountered before. It was large, much larger than any island in the Pacific. It had towering mountains, some capped with snow. The forests were different, dominated by giant ferns and trees unlike those of the tropics. The bird life was extraordinary, including massive flightless birds, the moa, that stood taller than a person. The settlers adapted. They developed new techniques for living in a temperate climate. They hunted the moa, eventually to extinction. They cultivated crops adapted to cooler temperatures. They explored the coastlines, discovering that what they'd found was actually 2 major islands, plus numerous smaller ones, with a total landmass far larger than all the previously settled Polynesian islands combined. The oral traditions of the Maori people preserved the names of the great canoes that made this journey: Aotea, Kurahaupo, Matatua, Tainui, Tokomaru, and others. Each canoe's descendants became a tribe, and the stories of those voyages were passed down through generations, maintaining the memory of an achievement that would not be replicated until European explorers with far more advanced technology reached these same shores centuries later. Stories carried across generations can be as real as stone monuments, as lasting as any writing. The Maori preserved not just names but details: the colour of a canoe's sail, the name of a navigator, the location of landfall. These oral traditions were not vague myths but precise histories, passed down through specialised training, memorised and repeated, until they became part of cultural identity. When European scholars finally began to listen, they found these oral histories remarkably accurate, corroborated by archaeological evidence and navigation studies. The stories were maps, were histories, were instruction manuals for living in a new land, all carried in memory across centuries, proving that writing is not the only way to preserve truth. And then there is the mystery of Easter Island, the most isolated inhabited place on Earth. Easter Island, Rapa Nui, sits in the southeastern Pacific, over 1,000 miles from its nearest inhabited neighbour. Its settlement by Polynesian voyagers around 800 CE represents ocean navigation at its most audacious and mysterious. How did navigators find this tiny speck of land in the vast expanse of the Pacific? It's barely 14 miles across, a target that could be sailed past in the night without ever seeing it. There are no islands nearby to serve as stepping stones. The currents in this part of the Pacific are complex and shifting, yet somehow a canoe or multiple canoes made the journey from Western Polynesia and established a settlement that would last for over 1,000 years. The voyage to Rapa Nui was likely one way. The prevailing winds and currents make return journeys extremely difficult. The people who sailed there must have known they were committing themselves and their descendants to this small island, separated by vast distances from the rest of Polynesian culture. On Rapa Nui, the settlers developed a unique culture. They carved giant stone heads, moai, that still stand today, mysterious and imposing. They developed a written language, one of the few in Polynesia. They managed the limited resources of their small island until environmental pressures and internal conflicts led to the societal collapse before European contact. The journey to Easter Island remains one of the great mysteries of Polynesian navigation. What signs did the navigators follow? Did they know the island was there, or was its discovery accidental? Was this a planned settlement, or the result of canoes blown off course during other voyages? We may never know the full story, but we know that somehow, improbably, incredibly, Polynesian navigators reached the most isolated inhabited place on Earth using nothing but traditional navigation techniques, establishing a culture that would persist in complete isolation for centuries. While Polynesians explored the Pacific, another seafaring culture was pushing west across the North Atlantic. The Vikings, Norse seafarers from Scandinavia, ventured into cold northern waters in open boats, discovering Iceland, Greenland, and eventually North America 5 centuries before Columbus. Their ships were different from Polynesian canoes, their navigation methods distinct, but their courage and skill were equally remarkable. In the year 982, a red-haired Norwegian named Erik Thorvaldsen, known as Erik the Red, was exiled from Iceland for killing a man in a dispute. He had 3 years of banishment to serve, and he decided to spend them exploring. Rumours spoke of land to the west, glimpsed by sailors blown off course. Erik decided to find it. He sailed west from Iceland in a longship, an open wooden vessel perhaps 60 feet long, powered by a single square sail and oars. The North Atlantic is cold and stormy, with fogs that can last for days, with waves that tower overhead, with ice floating down from the Arctic. But the longship was surprisingly seaworthy, its flexible hull riding over waves rather than fighting through them. After days at sea, Eric sighted land, a coastline of fjords and mountains not unlike Norway itself. He spent his exile years exploring this new land, finding areas where grass grew in the summer, where cattle could graze, where Norse settlers could potentially establish farms. When his exile ended, he returned to Iceland with tales of this discovery. He called it Greenland. This was partly accurate. The southern coast, where Eric explored, was indeed relatively green in summer, but also partly marketing. Eric wanted to encourage settlement, and a name like Greenland sounded more appealing than Land of Ice, or some such honest description. The strategy worked. Hundreds of Icelanders joined Eric in sailing to Greenland, establishing settlements that would persist for nearly 5 centuries. Names shaped perception in powerful ways. Had Eric called his new home Icefield or Frozen Coast, settlers might have stayed in Iceland, but Greenland suggested fertility, opportunity, a place where life could flourish. The deception, if it was deception, worked. Families followed Eric westward, bringing livestock and possessions, establishing farms on fjord coastlines where grass grew during brief summers. They built churches and farms, created a society that lasted centuries despite immense challenges. The naming itself reveals something about Viking culture, the importance of reputation, the power of story and legend, the willingness to risk everything for the promise of new land. Later explorers would use similar tactics, naming places New France or New Holland to suggest familiarity and promise. The psychological impact of names should not be underestimated. They shape expectations, influence decisions, attract settlers or warn them away. A coastline called Cape of Storms feels dangerous. Renamed Cape of Good Hope, the same coastline suggests opportunity. Eric understood this, whether consciously or instinctively, and his naming choice influenced centuries of Norse history. The Greenland Norse developed a unique culture, adapted to their harsh environment. They raised sheep and cattle, hunted seals and walrus, traded with the Inuit, who were also settling Greenland. They built churches and farmed in valleys that today are too cold for agriculture. At their peak, perhaps 5,000 Norse lived in Greenland, maintaining contact with Iceland and Norway through sporadic voyages across dangerous seas. The Greenland settlements eventually failed. Climate cooling, resource depletion, and loss of contact with Europe led to their abandonment by the 15th century. But for 500 years, Eric the Red's gamble paid off, creating a Norse outpost on the edge of the Arctic, closer to North America than to Norway. Following his father's path, Leif Erikson sailed even further west. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, sailed west from Greenland in search of lands that had been spotted by another sailor blown off course. He sailed past Baffin Island, cold, forbidding, covered in flat stones, which he called Helluland, land of flat stones. He sailed past Labrador, forested, but still too cold for settlement, which he called Markland, land of forests. Then he sailed further south and found something unexpected, a land where grapes grew wild, where the climate was milder than Greenland or even Iceland, where salmon ran in the rivers and the grass stayed green longer into the fall. He called it Vinland, land of wine, and established a small settlement at a place now known as Lanceau Meadows, on the northern tip of Newfoundland. Vinland was North America. 500 years before Columbus, Norse explorers had reached the New World, had established a settlement, had met the indigenous peoples living there. But this discovery led to no permanent colonization, no great age of exploration. The distance from Greenland was too great. the local population too resistant to Norse presence, the resources of Vinland not valuable enough to justify the danger of the crossing. Leif's settlement lasted only a few years. Other attempts were made. Sagas speak of Thorfinn Karlsefni leading a larger expedition, attempting to establish a permanent colony, but conflicts with the indigenous people made this impossible. The Norse abandoned Vinland, returning to Greenland. The memory of this western land persisted in sagas and stories, but no sustained contact was maintained. The Norse discovery of America was not recorded in European chronicles. It was preserved only in Icelandic sagas, stories passed down orally for generations before being written down. For centuries, scholars debated whether these sagas were history or legend. It wasn't until 1960, when archaeological excavations at Lanceau Meadows uncovered Norse artifacts, nails, a spindle whorl, a bronze pin, that the truth was confirmed. The Vikings had indeed reached America, half a millennium before Columbus, in their open boats, guided only by sun and stars and the experience of skilled sailors who knew how to read the North Atlantic's moods. The Viking achievement wasn't just reaching new lands, it was maintaining regular contact across the North Atlantic despite the dangers. For centuries, Norse sailors made voyages between Norway, Iceland, Greenland, and occasionally to North America. These weren't exploratory voyages, but routine travel, the medieval equivalent of ocean highways. The routes were memorized and passed down through generations. Sail west from Norway for 7 days and you'll reach Iceland. From Iceland, sail west for another 7 days and you'll reach Greenland. These were not precise measurements. The actual time varied with wind and current, but they gave sailors a framework, a way to navigate without charts or instruments. Navigation was done by observation. The sun's height at noon gave latitude. The color of the water indicated depth and proximity to land. Whales and seabirds provided clues about location. Experienced sailors could navigate in fog by reading the waves. Ocean swells have characteristic patterns that change when influenced by land or ice. The ships themselves were works of art, clinker-built, meaning the hull planks overlapped, creating a flexible structure that could twist and flex in heavy seas without breaking. The single square sail was made of wool, often dyed red. The steering oar, a large paddle attached to the right rear of the ship, gave the steersman surprising control. The ship could sail surprisingly close to the wind, could be rowed in calms, could be beached for repairs. Life aboard a Viking ship crossing the Atlantic was harsh. No cabin, just an open deck. Crew members slept in leather sleeping bags that provided some protection from spray. Food was dried fish and meat, hard bread, beer or water. Everything was constantly damp from spray. Storms could last for days, forcing the crew to bail constantly, to manage the sail in winds that threatened to dismember the ship. But the voyages continued, year after year, maintaining a Norse presence across the entire North Atlantic. The network only collapsed when the Greenland settlements failed in the 15th century, severing the western link. But for centuries, the Vikings had created and maintained an oceanic culture, linking lands separated by thousands of miles of cold, storm-tossed sea, achieving what wouldn't be done again until European explorers, with better ships and better instruments, rediscovered these same routes centuries later. In the 15th century, European exploration entered a new phase. The Portuguese, a small nation on the edge of Europe, began systematically pushing south along the African coast, seeking a sea route to the riches of Asia. Their voyages were methodical, incremental, each expedition sailing slightly further than the last, mapping coastlines, establishing trading posts. slowly extending Portuguese knowledge of the world beyond the Mediterranean. Prince Henry of Portugal, known to history as Henry the Navigator, never actually navigated anywhere. He rarely went to sea, but from his base at Sagres, on Portugal's southwestern tip, he organized and funded expeditions that would change the world. His approach was systematic, almost scientific for its time. Each voyage built on the knowledge gained from previous ones, gradually extending Portuguese reach down the African coast. Before Henry, European sailors feared the waters south of Cape Bojador, a headland on the West African coast. Rumors spoke of boiling seas, of monsters, of waters so hot that ships would burst into flames. The Cape jutted into the Atlantic with dangerous currents and frequent storms. For years, Portuguese ships turned back before reaching it. Henry insisted they continue. In 1434, one of his captains, Gil Eans, finally sailed past Cape Bojador and returned to report that the seas beyond were no different from those before. The psychological barrier was broken. Portuguese ships began exploring further south, mapping the African coast, making contact with coastal peoples, establishing the slave trade that would become one of the darker legacies of the Age of Discovery. Each voyage pushed a little further, reach a new headland, name it, record its position as best they could, with the instruments available, and return. The next voyage would go a bit further. Progress was slow but steady. By the time of Henry's death in 1460, Portuguese ships had reached as far as present-day Sierra Leone, over 1,500 miles south of Cape Bojador. The method was important. This wasn't random exploration, but systematic mapping, a deliberate attempt to extend knowledge southward, toward the goal of finding a sea route around Africa to the Indian Ocean and the riches of Asia beyond. Henry never saw this goal achieved. He died years before it happened, but his organizational approach made it possible. The ships used for these early voyages were caravels, small, maneuverable vessels with lateen sails that could sail closer to the wind than the square-rigged ships of the Vikings. They were perfect for coastal exploration. They could enter rivers and estuaries, could be beached for repairs, could turn and maneuver in confined waters. They were not ideal for open ocean crossings, but for hugging a coast and mapping it methodically, they were superb. In 1487, Bartolomeu Dias sailed from Lisbon with 3 ships, tasked with finding the southern tip of Africa. Portuguese ships had been inching southward for decades. Everyone knew Africa had to end somewhere. That somewhere there had to be a way around it, a passage into the Indian Ocean. Dias was determined to find it. He sailed south down the African coast, further than any previous expedition. The coastline kept extending south, further and further, until Dias began to wonder if Africa had no end. Then, in January 1488, his ships were caught in a storm. For days, they battled wind and waves, driven far from sight of land, unable to see sun or stars for navigation, just trying to survive the violence of the sea. When the storm finally cleared, Dias turned east, expecting to sight the African coast, but there was nothing. He sailed further east, still nothing. Finally, he turned north, and after several days, land appeared, but from the north. He had rounded Africa's southern tip without seeing it, blown around the Cape by the storm. Dias had found the way. The passage to India existed. He sailed east along the southern coast of Africa, proving that the way was clear. His crew, exhausted and nervous about sailing into unknown waters, convinced him to turn back. But he had accomplished his mission. On the return voyage, he finally saw the Cape he had rounded. a rocky headland jutting into violent seas where the Atlantic and Indian Oceans meet. He called it Cabo das Tormentas, the Cape of Storms, an honest name given his experience. But King John II of Portugal, thinking of the economic possibilities this route opened, renamed it the Cape of Good Hope. The way to India was open. Within a decade, Vasco da Gama would follow Dias's route all the way to India, establishing a Portuguese sea route to Asia and changing global trade forever. On July 8, 1497, Vasco da Gama sailed from Lisbon commanding 4 ships, following the route Dias had pioneered. His goal was not just around Africa, but to reach India, to establish direct Portuguese contact with the source of the spices that were so valuable in Europe. The voyage was long and difficult. Da Gama didn't hug the African coast as earlier expeditions had. Instead, after reaching the Cape Verde Islands, he swung far west into the Atlantic, taking advantage of the trade winds and currents that would carry his ship south in a great arc. This open ocean sailing was bolder than previous Portuguese approaches, but also more efficient. It avoided the contrary winds and currents that plagued ships trying to sail down the African coast. After 3 months at sea, far longer than any previous Portuguese voyage, da Gama sighted the African coast again, near the Cape of Good Hope. He had successfully navigated the South Atlantic, covering nearly 6,000 miles without sight of land. The ships were weathered, the crews exhausted and suffering from scurvy, but they pressed on. Rounding the Cape, da Gama sailed up the east coast of Africa, entering waters no European had ever seen. He stopped at trading ports dominated by Arab and Swahili traders, who were not pleased to see Portuguese ships intruding on their established routes. At Malindi, in present-day Kenya, da Gama hired an experienced pilot who knew the route to India. With this local guide's help, the ships crossed the Indian Ocean, taking advantage of the monsoon winds that Arab traders had been using for centuries. On May 20th, 1498, nearly 10 months after leaving Lisbon, da Gama's ships anchored off Calicut, on India's southwest coast. The Portuguese had reached India by sea. The route was longer than the overland routes, more dangerous, more expensive in terms of ships and lives lost. But it was a route controlled by Portugal, not dependent on the permission of the various kingdoms and empires that controlled the overland routes. The economic and political implications were enormous. Da Gama returned to Portugal in 1499, having lost 2 of his 4 ships and over half his crew to scurvy and storms. But he brought back spices and proof that the route worked. The Age of Discovery had achieved one of its primary goals, a sea route to Asia. The world was about to become much smaller and much more interconnected. While the Portuguese were finding their way to Asia by sailing around Africa, others were considering a different route, sailing west across the Atlantic. The idea wasn't new. Everyone educated in 15th century Europe knew the world was round. The question wasn't whether you could reach Asia by sailing west, but whether the distance was survivable. Christopher Columbus believed it was. He was wrong about the distance, but right that something lay across the Atlantic, just not what he expected. In August 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed from Spain with 3 ships, the Santa Maria, Pinta, and Niña, and about 90 crew members. His goal was to reach Asia by sailing west, to find a shorter route to the riches of the East than the long journey around Africa that the Portuguese were pioneering. Columbus had studied maps and texts, calculating the distance across the Atlantic. His calculations were wrong. He significantly underestimated Earth's circumference and significantly overestimated the size of Asia. By his reckoning, Japan was only about 3,000 miles west of the Canary Islands. The actual distance is over 10,000 miles. Impossible for ships of that era to sail without resupply. But Columbus was confident. He sailed west from the Canaries, pushed by the trade winds that blow consistently from east to west at that latitude. The crews grew nervous as days passed with no sight of land. But Columbus urged them on. He kept 2 logs, a private one with the actual distances travelled, and a public one showing shorter distances to keep the crew from panicking about how far they'd sailed from home. On October 12th, after 33 days at sea, a lookout on the Pinta spotted land, an island in the Bahamas. Columbus, certain he'd reached the East Indies, called the inhabitants Indians. He explored several islands, noting the gold ornaments worn by the natives, convinced he'd found the edge of Asia. He returned to Spain with samples of gold, exotic plants, and several indigenous people, claiming to have found a new route to the east. 3 more voyages followed. Columbus explored the Caribbean, reached the mainland of South America, established settlements in Hispaniola. But he never accepted that he'd found a new continent. To his death, he insisted that Cuba was part of mainland Asia, that he had achieved his goal of reaching the east by sailing west. Others realized the truth. Amerigo Vespucci, sailing along the South American coast, recognized that this was a continent unknown to Europeans. A German cartographer, creating a world map in 1507, labeled this new continent America in Vespucci's honor. The name stuck. Columbus hadn't found what he sought, but he'd found something arguably more significant, a new world, or at least new to Europeans. The age of exploration had revealed that the world was larger and more complex than medieval geography had suggested, and the consequences of that discovery would reshape human history. These voyages set in motion what we now call the Columbian Exchange. Columbus's voyages initiated what historians call the Columbian Exchange, the transfer of plants, animals, diseases, and ideas between the Old World and the New. The impacts were profound and often devastating. European diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza, to which Native Americans had no immunity, swept through indigenous populations. Within a century of first contact, the native population of the Americas had declined by as much as 90% in some regions. Entire civilizations collapsed. Societies that had existed for thousands of years disintegrated in just decades. But the exchange went both ways. Crops from the Americas transformed Old World agriculture. Potatoes from South America became a staple crop in Europe and later in Asia. Capable of feeding more people per acre than traditional grains, maize spread across Africa and Asia. Tomatoes, originally from Mexico, became central to Italian cuisine. Cacao, tobacco, rubber, all American crops, changed Old World economies and cultures. Animals too were exchanged. Horses brought to the Americas by Spanish conquistadors escaped and became feral, eventually transforming Native American cultures across the Great Plains. Cattle, sheep, and pigs established themselves in the Americas. In the opposite direction, turkeys and guinea pigs made their way to Europe, though with less dramatic impact. The exchange wasn't limited to biological materials. Ideas, technologies, and diseases crossed the Atlantic in both directions. The impacts rippled across centuries, reshaping agriculture, economics, warfare, and culture on both sides of the ocean. Columbus's voyages didn't just discover new lands. They initiated a transformation of global ecology and society that continues to influence the world today. Columbus had sailed west and found a new continent, but the question remained, could you reach Asia by sailing west, or did this new land block the route? In 1519, a Portuguese navigator named Ferdinand Magellan, sailing for Spain, set out to answer that question by attempting something even more ambitious, sailing completely around the world. Magellan commanded 5 ships and about 270 men when he left Spain on September 20th, 1519. The expedition sailed south along the coast of South America, searching for a passage through to the ocean that lay beyond. They explored every inlet and estuary, each time hoping this might be the strait they sought. In October 1520, after more than a year of searching, they found it, a narrow, treacherous passage near the southern tip of South America. For 38 days, the ships navigated through this strait, battling currents and winds, surrounded by mountains and glaciers. When they finally emerged into open ocean on the western side, Magellan wept with joy. He had found the way through. The ocean before them seemed calm after the storms of the strait. Magellan named it the Pacific, the peaceful sea, but its size was far greater than anyone had imagined. They sailed west for 98 days without sighting land, running out of food, reduced to eating leather and rats, suffering terribly from scurvy. The scale of the Pacific Ocean, revealed for the first time to European explorers, was staggering. When they finally reached Guam in March 1521, they found land and food but were in desperate condition. They continued to the Philippines, where Magellan became involved in local politics and was killed in battle on April 27, 1521. His second in command, Juan Sebastian Elcano, took over, determined to complete the circumnavigation. Only one ship, the Victoria, completed the journey. Elcano sailed west across the Indian Ocean, around the Cape of Good Hope, and north to Spain, arriving on September 6, 1522, nearly 3 years after departure. Of the 270 men who began the voyage, only 18 survived to complete it. But they had done what was thought impossible. They had sailed completely around the world, proving beyond doubt that Earth was a sphere and revealing the true size of the planet. The voyage was a disaster by almost any measure. Ships lost, men dead, Magellan himself killed before completion. But it was also one of the greatest achievements in exploration history, a journey that expanded human understanding of the world more than any previous voyage. By the 18th century, the basic outline of the world's geography was known. The major continents had been discovered, the general routes between them charted. Exploration began to focus less on finding new lands and more on understanding what was already known, mapping coastlines precisely, charting currents and depths, cataloguing the life that filled the oceans. These scientific voyages expanded human knowledge in ways as significant as the great discoveries, revealing that the oceans were not empty highways between lands, but complex systems full of life and mystery. In 1768, Lieutenant James Cook sailed from England aboard HMS Endeavour with a dual mission: to observe the transit of Venus across the Sun from Tahiti, an astronomical event that would help scientists calculate the distance from Earth to the Sun, and to search for Terra Australis Incognita, the great southern continent that geographers insisted had to exist to balance the land masses of the Northern Hemisphere. Cook was not a gentleman explorer, but a skilled navigator and surveyor from working-class origins. He had learned his trade on coal ships in the rough North Sea, had proven himself mapping the St. Lawrence River during the 7 Years' War. He approached exploration methodically, with an eye for detail and an insistence on accuracy that would make his charts the standard for decades. The voyage to Tahiti was successful. The transit was observed and recorded. Then Cook opened sealed orders directing him to sail south and west, searching for the hypothetical southern continent. He sailed into waters rarely visited by Europeans, finding New Zealand, already discovered by Tasman but poorly mapped, and spending 6 months charting its coastline with unprecedented precision. Then he sailed west and sighted the eastern coast of Australia. For 4 months, he followed this coast north, mapping as he went, nearly losing the ship on the Great Barrier Reef, eventually rounding Cape York and proving that Australia and New Guinea were separate landmasses. He returned to England in 1771, having circumnavigated the globe, having mapped thousands of miles of coastline, having added enormous amounts to European knowledge of the Pacific. 2 more voyages followed. The second, from 1772 to 1775, took Cook further south than anyone had been, crossing the Antarctic Circle multiple times, proving that if a southern continent existed, it was buried under ice and not the temperate paradise geographers had imagined. The third voyage, from 1776 to 1779, searched for a northwest passage from the Pacific side, reaching the Bering Strait before ice forced the ship south. Cook was killed in Hawaii in 1779 during a conflict with islanders, ending a career that had transformed European understanding of the Pacific. Cook's legacy was more than just maps, though his charts remained in use for over a century. He also revolutionized shipboard health. Previous long voyages had typically lost half or more of their crews to scurvy. Cook insisted on cleanliness, fresh food when available, and enforced consumption of sauerkraut and other preserved vegetables. On his second voyage, he circumnavigated the globe with only 1 death from illness, an unprecedented achievement that proved scurvy was preventable. Later came another transformative scientific voyage, that of the Beagle. In 1831, a young naturalist named Charles Darwin boarded HMS Beagle, beginning a voyage that would last 5 years and fundamentally change biology. The Beagle was conducting a hydrographic survey of South America's coast, but Darwin was along to observe and collect specimens, to be the ship's naturalist, to study the natural history of the places they visited. The voyage was long and often tedious, months spent surveying coastlines, while Darwin went ashore to explore, collect, and observe. But those observations accumulated into something revolutionary. Darwin noticed how species varied from place to place, how island species differed from mainland ones, how fossils suggested that current species had evolved from different ancient forms. The Galapagos Islands were particularly significant. This volcanic archipelago, isolated in the Pacific 600 miles from South America, held species found nowhere else. Darwin observed that finches on different islands had different beak shapes, apparently adapted to different food sources. Giant tortoises on different islands had differently shaped shells. The implications were profound. Species were not fixed and unchanging, but adapted to their environments over time. Darwin returned to England in 1836 with notebooks full of observations and specimens by the thousands: birds, insects, plants, fossils, rocks. He spent the next 2 decades analyzing this material, corresponding with experts, gradually developing his theory of evolution by natural selection. When he finally published On the Origin of Species in 1859, it revolutionized biology, explaining for the first time how the diversity of life had developed. The Beagle voyage demonstrated that ocean exploration wasn't just about finding new lands or trade routes. It was also about understanding the natural world, about recognizing patterns and processes that shaped life on Earth. Darwin's observations made during a surveying voyage that was primarily about mapping coastlines ended up being far more significant than the charts the voyage produced. In 1872, HMS Challenger departed England on a voyage specifically designed to explore the oceans themselves, not the lands around them, but the water, the life within it, the seabed beneath it. This was oceanography being born as a science, the first systematic attempt to understand the oceans as complex systems rather than just highways for ships. The expedition lasted 3.5 years, covering nearly 70,000 miles, visiting every ocean except the Arctic. The ship was fitted out as a floating laboratory, with equipment for taking depth soundings, for collecting water samples from various depths, for dredging the sea floor, for preserving specimens. Scientists aboard conducted experiments and observations continuously, building a comprehensive picture of ocean conditions worldwide. The findings were revolutionary. The expedition discovered that the ocean floor was not flat, but highly variable. Deep trenches, underwater mountains, abyssal plains. They took depth soundings that revealed the Mariana Trench, the deepest point in Earth's oceans. They discovered hundreds of new species, demonstrating that life existed even at the greatest depths, in conditions previously thought impossible for life. They measured water temperatures at various depths, discovering the thermocline, the boundary between warm surface water and cold deep water. They analyzed water chemistry, learning about salinity patterns and how they varied with depth and location. They collected sediment samples from the sea floor, revealing patterns of sedimentation that would later prove crucial to understanding plate tectonics. The data collected during the Challenger expedition filled 50 volumes when published, establishing oceanography as a serious scientific discipline. The expedition proved that the oceans were not empty three-dimensional spaces, but complex environments with their own geography, chemistry, and ecology. Understanding the ocean, the expedition demonstrated, required the same systematic scientific approach that had been applied to land, and the results could be equally revealing. Not all ocean voyaging was about discovery or science. By the 19th century, with trade routes established and major land masses known, competition emerged around a different metric: speed. Could you sail from China to London faster than your competitors? Could you break records for Atlantic crossings? The era of clipper ships and racing yachts turned ocean voyaging into sport, pushing ship design to its limits and creating some of the most beautiful vessels ever to sail. In the 1840s and 50s, clipper ships represented the peak of sailing ship design. These vessels were built for speed, not cargo capacity. They were long, narrow, heavily canvassed, capable of sustained high speeds that more traditional cargo ships couldn't match. They were expensive to build and expensive to operate, but for certain valuable cargoes, tea from China, gold rush passengers to California, speed commanded a premium price. The most famous clipper route was the tea race from China to London. The first tea of the season commanded the highest prices, so ships raced each other across the Indian Ocean, around the Cape of Good Hope, and up the Atlantic. Captains pushed their ships and crews hard, carrying as much sail as the mast could bear, taking risks in storms that more cautious captains would avoid. Average passages of 100 days from China to London became the standard, with the fastest clippers occasionally managing it in under 90 days. Life aboard a clipper during a record attempt was intense. The ships heeled over at steep angles, decks constantly awash with water, masts creaking under the strain of carrying sail in winds where traditional ships would reef. The crew worked watch-on, watch-off schedules, grabbing sleep when they could, always ready to go aloft in any weather to adjust sails. It was dangerous work. Men went overboard in storms, fell from yards while reefing sails high above the deck, were injured by gear breaking under strain. But the clippers were beautiful, perhaps the most aesthetically perfect sailing vessels ever designed. Their hulls were graceful, their lines elegant, their clouds of canvas magnificent when fully rigged. Contemporary accounts speak of them almost as living creatures, racing across the ocean with spray flying, bow wave roaring, sails driving them forward at speeds that could reach 20 knots in favorable winds. The era didn't last long. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 provided a shortcut for steamships that sailing ships couldn't use effectively. Steam power itself became more reliable and economical. By the 1880s, the clipper ships were obsolete, replaced by less beautiful but more practical steam-powered vessels. But for a few decades, they represented the peak of what sailing ships could achieve, the ultimate development of technology that stretched back millennia. As steamships took over ocean travel, competition shifted to them. The Blue Ribbon was an unofficial award for the fastest Atlantic crossing. Not just passenger ships, but any large vessel making the run between Europe and America. In an era before air travel, when a transatlantic voyage took days rather than hours, speed mattered. Passengers wanted the fastest crossing, and shipping companies competed fiercely for the prestige of holding the record. The record times decreased steadily as technology improved. In 1858, the fastest crossing was about 9 days. By 1900, it was under 6 days. By the 1930s, it was under 4 days. Each improvement required better engines, better hull design, better understanding of weather routing. The competition drove innovation in marine engineering. The great ocean liners that competed for the Blue Ribbon were floating palaces, enormous vessels with luxury accommodations, multiple decks, elaborate dining rooms and ballrooms. But beneath the luxury was raw power, massive engines driving them through the Atlantic at speeds that would have astonished sailors from the age of sail. These ships could maintain 25 or 30 knots for days at a time, covering 600 miles in 24 hours. The competition had its costs. Speed required burning enormous amounts of coal or oil. It meant operating in conditions where safety margins were reduced. Several ships pushing for records experienced mechanical failures or near disasters. But the prestige and passenger preference for the fastest ships drove companies to continue competing despite the risks and expenses. The era of the great ocean liners ended with air travel. By the 1960s, jets had made transatlantic crossings a matter of hours rather than days. The last blue ribbon holder for passenger ships was the SS United States, which made the crossing in 1952 in 3 days, 10 hours. A record that still stands for a commercial passenger vessel. The era of racing across the ocean for passenger transport was over, though racing for sport continues with sailing yachts competing in transoceanic races. While commercial ships no longer race across oceans, competitive ocean sailing has evolved into a specialized sport. Races like the Vendée Globe, a solo, non-stop circumnavigation, push sailors and their boats to extremes that make historical voyages look almost relaxed by comparison. The boats used in modern ocean racing are highly specialized, designed purely for speed. They're light, narrow, carry enormous sail areas, and require constant attention from the solo sailor or small crew. They can reach speeds over 30 knots, faster than many motor vessels, when conditions are right. They're also unforgiving. A small mistake in heavy weather can lead to capsize, dismasting, or worse. solo ocean racing is particularly extreme. Sailors spend months alone at sea, catching sleep in 20-minute increments between sail changes and navigation checks. They eat freeze-dried food, drink desalinated water, communicate via satellite with race headquarters, but are otherwise completely isolated. When things go wrong, and in ocean racing, things often go wrong, they must solve problems themselves, with whatever materials and tools they have aboard. The Vendée Globe circumnavigation takes roughly 3 months of non-stop sailing, covering about 24,000 miles through some of the most treacherous waters on Earth. Sailors round the 3 Great Capes, Good Hope, Leeuwin, Horn, in the Southern Ocean, where waves can reach 60 feet and winds exceed hurricane force. The attrition rate is high. Often half or more of the starting fleet doesn't finish, stopped by damage, injury, or simply the exhaustion of the endeavor. Modern ocean racing represents exploration of a different kind, not finding new lands, but pushing human and technological limits, seeing how fast, how far, how extreme ocean voyaging can be when speed is the primary goal. It's sailing stripped of everything except the challenge, the sea, and human determination to go faster than before. While explorers mapped coastlines and raced across ocean surfaces, the depths remained almost completely unknown. The deep ocean, below the reach of sunlight, where pressure would crush any normal vessel, where conditions seemed incompatible with life, was Earth's last truly unexplored frontier. Venturing into these depths required new technology, new understanding, and courage of a different kind than surface exploration demanded. In 1930, William Beebe, a naturalist, and Otis Barton, an engineer, lowered themselves into the ocean off Bermuda, inside a steel sphere only 4.5 feet in diameter. The bathysphere was suspended from a ship by a steel cable, had tiny windows made of fused quartz, and was completely at the mercy of the surface ship and its winch. It was dangerous, claustrophobic, and revolutionary. On their first deep dive, they descended to 800 feet. The water outside the windows turned from blue to purple to black as they left the zone where sunlight penetrates. Beebe described seeing strange fish that had never been observed alive, creatures with luminescent organs that glowed in the darkness, with enormous eyes adapted to the faint light of the deep ocean, with bizarre body shapes unlike anything found near the surface. Over several years of dives, they went progressively deeper. In 1934, they reached 3,028 feet, half a mile down, deeper than any human had ever ventured. The pressure at that depth was over 0.5 ton per square inch. A small leak would have been instantly fatal, the water entering as a high-pressure jet capable of cutting through flesh and bone. Inside the bathysphere, conditions were primitive. The sphere was not temperature-controlled. It grew cold as they descended into water that was near freezing. Humidity from their breath condensed on the walls. The air quality degraded as oxygen was consumed and carbon dioxide accumulated, though they carried supplies to absorb carbon dioxide and replenish oxygen. They could not move around. The sphere was so small they sat in fixed positions, knees almost touching, staring out the windows into the darkness. But what they saw was worth the discomfort and danger. They observed a world no one had ever seen. Fish that existed only in the deep, jellyfish pulsing slowly through the black water, occasional glimpses of larger creatures at the limit of their light's reach. They realized that the deep ocean was not empty but full of life, though life adapted to conditions vastly different from those at the surface. The bathysphere dives were important not just for what was observed, but for proving that humans could venture into the deep ocean and return. The technology was primitive, the risks enormous, but Beebe and Barton had shown it was possible. Future deep-sea exploration would use their achievements as a foundation. On January 23, 1960, Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh descended to the bottom of the Mariana Trench in the Bathyscaphe Trieste, a free-diving submersible capable of reaching the deepest point in Earth's oceans. The Challenger Deep, as this point is called, lies nearly 7 miles beneath the surface, where pressure reaches over 1,000 atmospheres, over 15,000 pounds per square inch. The descent took nearly 5 hours. They passed through zones of decreasing light, through layers of water with different temperatures and densities, into darkness so complete that their lights barely penetrated it. The pressure increased steadily, compressing the pressure sphere, making it smaller by millimeters. A small change, but enough to create disturbing creaking and groaning sounds. At about 32,000 feet, they heard a loud crack. Something had broken. They had to decide, abort and return to surface, or continue to the bottom, another 3,000 feet down. They checked all systems, saw no signs of immediate danger, and decided to continue. The noise, they later discovered, was a non-critical external window breaking under the pressure. Frightening, but not life-threatening. At 35,813 feet, the Trieste touched bottom. Through the small viewport, Piccard and Walsh saw something unexpected, a flatfish and some shrimp, evidence that life existed even here, at the deepest point in the ocean, under crushing pressure and in absolute darkness. The deep-sea trenches were not lifeless zones, but functioning ecosystems, though how life survived and thrived in these conditions was barely understood. They stayed on the bottom for 20 minutes, taking measurements, observing what they could in the limited visibility. Then they dropped their ballast and began the ascent, rising slowly through the miles of water above them. The whole journey, descent, time on bottom, and ascent, took nearly 9 hours. The Trieste dive proved that humans could reach any depth in the ocean, that no part of the sea floor was beyond access, but it also demonstrated how difficult and expensive deep ocean exploration would be. Over 50 years passed before anyone returned to Challenger Deep. Filmmaker James Cameron in 2012, using improved technology, but still facing the same fundamental challenges of pressure and darkness that Piccard and Walsh had confronted. Today, deep-sea exploration uses sophisticated manned and unmanned submersibles to study the ocean depths. Vehicles like Alvin, which discovered hydrothermal vents in 1977, can dive to depths of nearly 15,000 feet, carry scientific equipment and sampling tools, and remain submerged for hours while researchers observe and collect specimens. The discovery of hydrothermal vents revolutionized understanding of deep-sea life. These underwater hot springs, found along mid-ocean ridges where tectonic plates spread apart, support ecosystems based not on photosynthesis, but on chemosynthesis, bacteria that derive energy from chemicals in the superheated water. Around these vents, tube worms, clams, and other creatures thrive in conditions that seem impossible for life. Complete darkness, crushing pressure, water temperatures hot enough to melt lead. Unmanned submersibles can venture even deeper and stay down longer than manned vehicles. ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, connected to surface ships by cables, can work at any depth, manipulating equipment with robotic arms, taking high-definition video, collecting samples. Autonomous underwater vehicles can be programmed to conduct surveys without any connection to the surface, gathering data on their own and returning to be recovered. These vehicles have revealed that the deep ocean contains vast mountain ranges, active volcanoes, deep trenches, and geological features as dramatic as anything found on land. They've discovered new species regularly. The deep ocean may contain more biodiversity than all terrestrial environments combined. They've found shipwrecks from ancient times, aircraft lost during wars, evidence of submarine landslides that dwarf anything found on land. The deep ocean remains largely unexplored. We've mapped more of the moon's surface than the ocean floor, but the tools exist now to explore these depths systematically, to understand the geology and ecology of environments that cover more of Earth's surface than all the continents combined. The frontier isn't gone, it's just moved to the deep, where pressure and darkness kept it hidden until technology caught up with human curiosity. While most ocean voyages involved crews, there were always individuals who chose to sail alone, whether from necessity, philosophy, or simple preference for solitude. Solo ocean sailing is perhaps the purest form of the endeavor, stripping away all support, all companionship, leaving only one person, one boat, and the sea. These sailors faced not just physical challenges but psychological ones, spending months alone with nothing but water in every direction. In 1895, a 51-year-old sea captain named Joshua Slocum departed Boston aboard a 37-foot sloop named Spray, beginning what would become the first solo circumnavigation of the globe. Slocum was already an experienced sailor, but this voyage would take him through waters no one had ever crossed alone, test his skills and endurance in ways no previous voyage had. Spray was not a sophisticated vessel. Slocum had rebuilt her himself from a derelict hulk, using mostly traditional methods and materials. She was heavy, slow, but sea-kindly. Her design meant she could be left to sail herself for hours at a time, while Slocum slept or attended to other tasks. This was crucial for solo sailing, where constant attention to the helm is impossible. The voyage lasted 3 years, from 1895 to 1898. Slocum sailed east across the Atlantic, through the Strait of Magellan, across the Pacific, through the Indian Ocean, around the Cape of Good Hope, and north to complete the circle. He stopped frequently, spending time in various ports, meeting people, taking on supplies, making repairs. But the sailing itself was solo. Just Slocum and Spray, working in partnership across the world's oceans. Solo sailing meant handling everything himself. Navigation, sail handling, cooking, cleaning, repairs, all had to be done without assistance. When storms struck, he had to manage them alone, sometimes staying at the helm for days, with only brief snatches of sleep. When Spray needed repairs, he had to do the work himself, using whatever materials he could find or improvise. When he was sick, which happened several times, there was no one to care for him or take over sailing duties. But there were also moments of profound peace, days of perfect sailing, Spray moving steadily across calm seas, while Slocum read or fished or simply watched the ocean. Sunsets and sunrises experienced in complete solitude. The satisfaction of navigating successfully across thousands of miles with only a compass, sextant, and his own skills. The freedom of being completely independent, master of his own schedule, answering to no one. Slocum returned to Newport, Rhode Island in 1898, completing the first solo circumnavigation. He wrote a book about the voyage, Sailing Alone Around the World, that became a classic of sailing literature. In 1909, he set out on another solo voyage and disappeared at sea, presumably lost in a storm somewhere in the Caribbean. He was 65 years old, still sailing alone, still seeking whatever it was he found in the solitude of the sea. In 1966, 65-year-old Francis Chichester departed Plymouth, England aboard a 54-foot ketch named Gypsy Moth 4, attempting to sail solo around the world as fast as possible with only one stop. Previous solo circumnavigators had stopped frequently. Slocum had made dozens of stops. Chichester wanted to push the boundaries to see how fast a solo sailor could circumnavigate with minimal time in port. The voyage was grueling. Chichester was not young, and the strain of single-handed sailing showed. He battled storms in the Southern Ocean, where waves tower overhead and winds scream at hurricane force day after day. He dealt with equipment failures, sails torn, rigging damaged, steering problems, all while continuing to push Gypsy Moth 4 at the highest speed possible. His single stop was in Sydney, Australia, after sailing around the Cape of Good Hope and across the Indian Ocean. He spent 6 weeks there making repairs and resting, then departed to sail around Cape Horn, one of the most dangerous passages in ocean sailing, where the Atlantic and Pacific meet in violent confusion of wind and wave and current. Solo rounding of Cape Horn had been done before, but it remained an accomplishment that commanded respect from sailors everywhere. Chichester completed the circumnavigation in 226 days of sailing, setting a record for solo sailing that stood for years. He returned to England in 1967 and was knighted by Queen Elizabeth, who used the same sword that had been used to knight Francis Drake 4 centuries earlier. The parallel was intentional. Chichester, like Drake, had sailed around the world, pushing the boundaries of what was possible at sea. His voyage demonstrated that fast, solo circumnavigation was possible, that the right boat with the right sailor could match or exceed the speeds of crewed vessels, while crossing oceans alone. It inspired a generation of solo sailors to push further, faster, to see what could be accomplished without the weight and complexity of crew, relying only on one person's skill and endurance. Today, solo ocean racing has evolved into a sport with purpose-built boats and professional sailors who compete to set records and win races. The boats used in events like the Vendée Globe are technological marvels: carbon fiber hulls, canting keels that can be moved side to side to optimize sail carrying ability, computer-controlled sail systems, satellite navigation and weather routing. But the fundamental challenge remains what it was for Slocum. One person, alone, managing everything required to sail across thousands of miles of ocean. Modern sailors have better tools, but they are also pushing harder, sailing faster, taking more risks. The boats are less forgiving than Spray. They're designed for maximum performance, which means they require constant attention and can be quickly overwhelmed if not managed properly. The psychological challenge may be even greater now than it was for earlier solo sailors. Slocum sailed slowly, had time to read and rest, approached the voyage almost meditatively. Modern solo racers push themselves to the limit, sleeping in 20-minute increments, constantly adjusting sails and course for optimal speed, racing against competitors who may be hundreds of miles away, but whose positions are known via satellite. Yet many modern solo sailors speak of finding the same thing Slocum found: peace in solitude, satisfaction in self-reliance, connection with the sea that's only possible when you're alone with it. The boats have changed, the technology is advanced, but the essential experience of solo ocean sailing, the isolation, the challenge, the moments of transcendence when person and boat and sea exist in perfect harmony, remains timeless. The oceans have been crossed, the major routes charted, the depths explored by submersibles. But ocean exploration continues, asking new questions and using new tools. Modern oceanography reveals that the seas are not static highways, but dynamic systems, that they contain mysteries as significant as anything discovered in the age of exploration, and that understanding them is crucial to understanding Earth itself. We have only recently begun to map the ocean floor. For most of human history, the ocean floor was unmapped. Depth soundings could tell you how far down the bottom was at a particular point, but creating a comprehensive map of submarine topography seemed impossible. That changed in the mid-20th century with sonar technology that could scan wide swaths of sea floor from surface ships. What was revealed transformed understanding of Earth's geology. The ocean floor is not flat but highly variable. Mountain ranges run through every ocean. Underwater volcanoes dot the landscape. Deep trenches mark where tectonic plates meet. The mid-ocean ridge system, the longest mountain range on Earth, stretches for over 40,000 miles through the world's oceans, marking the boundaries where new sea floor is created as plates spread apart. These discoveries provided crucial evidence for plate tectonics theory. The patterns of rocks on the sea floor, the ages of different sections of oceanic crust, the distribution of volcanic and seismic activity, all supported the idea that Earth's surface is divided into plates that move, colliding and spreading apart, creating and destroying crust over millions of years. Understanding the ocean floor became key to understanding how Earth works. Modern mapping uses satellites combined with ships equipped with multi-beam sonar. The result is increasingly detailed maps of submarine topography, revealing features that rival or exceed anything found on land. Submarine canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon, underwater waterfalls where dense water cascades down continental slopes, seamounts that rise miles from the abyssal plains but don't quite reach the surface. The ocean floor contains a landscape as dramatic as any continent, though hidden beneath miles of water. The ocean is not just water sitting in basins, but a dynamic system with currents that flow like rivers, transporting heat and salt around the globe. Understanding these currents has become crucial to understanding climate, because the ocean stores and transports enormous amounts of heat energy, far more than the atmosphere. The Gulf Stream, flowing from the Gulf of Mexico across the Atlantic to Europe, carries warm water north, moderating the climate of Western Europe. Without it, places like England would have climates more like Labrador, far colder and less hospitable. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current, flowing unimpeded around Antarctica, is the largest current on Earth, transporting more water than all the world's rivers combined. But currents exist in 3 dimensions. Surface currents, like the Gulf Stream, are driven by wind. Deep ocean currents are driven by differences in water density caused by temperature and salinity variations. These deep currents move slowly. Water that sinks in the North Atlantic may not resurface until it reaches the North Pacific centuries later. But they transport vast amounts of water and heat, acting as a conveyor belt that helps regulate global climate. Climate change is affecting these currents. The Gulf Stream appears to be weakening as melting Arctic ice adds fresh water to the North Atlantic. Changes in wind patterns are altering surface currents. The implications are significant. Even small changes in ocean currents can dramatically affect regional climates, rainfall patterns, and marine ecosystems. Understanding and monitoring these currents has become crucial to predicting and adapting to climate change. Modern ocean exploration has revealed an unwelcome discovery: vast accumulations of plastic debris in the ocean's gyres, the slow rotating current systems in the centers of ocean basins. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch is the most famous, but similar accumulations exist in other oceans. These aren't islands of trash as sometimes portrayed, but areas where plastic density is significantly higher than normal, with fragments ranging from visible debris to microplastics that require microscopes to see. Plastic in the ocean comes from many sources: direct dumping from ships, runoff from rivers, waste blown out to sea from coastal areas. It accumulates in the gyres because the currents naturally concentrate floating debris toward the center. Once there, it breaks down slowly, fragmenting into smaller and smaller pieces, but never truly disappearing. The impacts are still being understood, but appear significant. Marine animals ingest plastic, mistaking it for food. It accumulates in their digestive systems, potentially causing starvation or poisoning. Microplastics have been found in fish that humans eat, raising concerns about impacts on human health. The full extent of the problem and its long-term consequences remain subjects of active research. Addressing ocean plastic requires both stopping new pollution and removing what's already there. Both challenging tasks. The ocean is vast, the plastic is dispersed, and current technology makes cleanup difficult and expensive. But the problem has focused attention on the ocean, not just as a resource or highway, but as an environment that requires stewardship, that can be damaged by human activity, that needs protection even as it continues to be explored and used. After all the exploration, all the mapping and measuring and understanding, a question remains: why do oceans continue to draw people? Why do sailors still venture out onto the water? Why do explorers still dive into the depths? Why does the sea call to some essential human quality that has nothing to do with economic benefit or scientific knowledge? There's something about being on the ocean, far from land, that creates a particular kind of solitude. It's not just being alone. Plenty of people experience that on land. It's being alone in an environment that's fundamentally different from the terrestrial world humans evolved in, surrounded by water in every direction, with nothing solid nearby, nothing stable, just the constant motion of waves and the vast emptiness of sea and sky. For some people, this solitude is terrifying. For others, it's transcendent. Solo sailors often speak of entering a meditative state after days at sea, where the rhythms of the boat and the ocean become deeply familiar, where sleep and waking blur together, where time loses its normal structure. They describe feeling connected to the ocean in ways that are hard to articulate, as if the boat becomes an extension of themselves, or they become part of the ocean's movements. This isn't just romantic description. There's something real about the psychological state that develops during extended time at sea. The constant motion affects balance and perception. The lack of external stimulation changes how the brain processes information. The absence of social interaction alters thought patterns. Some people find this disturbing. Others find it peaceful, even addictive. They return to the ocean seeking that state of consciousness, that particular quality of solitude that exists nowhere else. The ocean offers challenges that can't be replicated on land. It's unpredictable in ways that mountains and deserts are not. It's in constant motion, never still, always changing. Weather systems move across it rapidly, creating conditions that shift from benign to dangerous in hours. Successfully crossing an ocean requires not just technical skill, but adaptability, the ability to respond to changing conditions, to manage risk, while continuing to make progress toward goals that may be thousands of miles distant. For some people, this challenge is the appeal. They want to test themselves against something genuinely difficult, something that demands their full capabilities. Ocean sailing offers that. It requires navigation skills, weather prediction, boat handling, mechanical repair, all combined with physical endurance and mental resilience. Few other activities demand such a broad range of abilities while offering such clear feedback. You either reach your destination or you don't. You either survive the storm or you don't. This isn't about courting danger for its own sake. Most skilled ocean sailors are careful, methodical, risk-averse in intelligent ways. But they've chosen an activity where stakes are high, where mistakes have serious consequences, where success requires sustained competence over days or weeks. The appeal is partly that difficulty itself, that ocean sailing cannot be casual, that it demands respect and skill, that it remains genuinely challenging no matter how experienced you become. Perhaps the deepest appeal of the ocean is simply its vastness, its suggestion of infinity. Stand on a beach and look at the horizon. Water as far as you can see, continuing beyond sight, covering most of Earth's surface. Sail out beyond sight of land and the feeling intensifies. Nothing but water in every direction. The horizon a perfect circle around you. The sky dome complete and unobstructed. This vastness offers a perspective that's increasingly rare in modern life. Most environments we inhabit are bounded. Rooms have walls, cities have edges, landscapes have features that limit view. The ocean, especially in mid-crossing, has none of this. It's fundamentally unbounded in a way that affects perception and thought. Problems that seem large on land shrink when surrounded by thousands of miles of water. The self feels smaller, which paradoxically can feel liberating. The ocean teaches scale in a way few other environments can. Stand on a mountaintop and you see for miles, but you see specific things, other mountains, valleys, forests, perhaps distant cities. The view is vast but detailed, full of identifiable features that orient you in space. On the ocean, there is no detail. There is only water and sky, meeting at a horizon that remains forever at the same distance no matter how far you travel. You are the only fixed point in a universe of motion. Everything else, the waves, the clouds, the wind, flows around you, through you, indifferent to your presence. This teaches humility in the deepest sense. Not humiliation, not smallness that diminishes, but true perspective on your place in the cosmos. You are tiny, yes, but you are also here now experiencing this moment, this place, this vast, indifferent beauty. That paradox, feeling both insignificant and profoundly present, is one of the ocean's greatest gifts. Ancient peoples saw the ocean as the edge of the world, the boundary between known and unknown. We know better now. The ocean is just water, covering a sphere we've explored and mapped. But out there, far from land, with nothing but horizon visible, it's easy to understand the ancient perception. The ocean still feels like a boundary, like a place where normal rules don't quite apply, like something fundamentally other than the terrestrial world we evolved in. We have mapped the ocean floor now, charted the currents, understood the chemistry of seawater. We have tagged and tracked creatures from tiny plankton to massive whales. We have dove to the deepest trenches, sailed to the most remote coordinates, circled the globe by every possible route. In one sense, there are no more ocean mysteries. We know what's out there. We understand how it works. We have explained the phenomena that once seemed magical. And yet, stand on the deck of a ship in the middle of an ocean, alone in the night, and you will feel that ancient sense of boundary, of edge, of something fundamentally other. Knowledge does not eliminate wonder. Understanding does not dispel mystery. The ocean remains the ocean, vast, powerful, beautiful, and somehow always just beyond our complete comprehension, even when we think we've understood it fully. This is the paradox of exploration. The more we know, the more we realize how much remains unknown. Not in facts, but in experience. In the felt sense of encountering something that refuses to be fully domesticated by human understanding. This otherness draws people who are drawn to such things, who want to experience environments unlike those humans normally inhabit, who seek perspective that only distance and isolation can provide, who find something essential in the vastness, the motion, the endless horizon. The ocean offers that, has always offered it, will continue to offer it, regardless of how thoroughly we explore and understand it. We've journeyed from Polynesian navigators crossing the Pacific by starlight to deep-sea submersibles exploring the Mariana Trench. We've sailed with Vikings to Greenland and America, with Magellan around the world, with Cook through the Pacific mapping coastlines with unprecedented precision. We've raced aboard clipper ships, dove in bathyspheres, circumnavigated solo, pushed into the deepest depths where no light reaches. Through all these stories runs a common thread. The ocean tests us. It tests our skills, our courage, our understanding, our ability to adapt and endure. It offers challenges that can't be found on land, experiences that can only be had far from shore, perspectives available only to those willing to venture beyond sight of solid ground. But the ocean isn't trying to test us. It's simply being itself, vast, powerful, indifferent to human ambitions. We're the ones who choose to venture out onto it, who build boats and navigate by stars, who dive into depths that seem designed to crush us, who sail solo across distances that seem impossible. The ocean just exists, following physical laws, moved by wind and tide, and the rotation of Earth itself. Anthropomorphizing the ocean is tempting but misleading. We speak of the ocean challenging us or testing us, but the ocean has no agency, no intention. It's simply water following physical laws, gravity pulling waves, wind generating motion, temperature differences creating currents. When a sailor drowns in a storm, the ocean didn't kill them. Physics did. The storm wasn't angry or cruel, just a low-pressure system following meteorological principles. This lack of intention, paradoxically, makes the ocean both more dangerous and more trustworthy than human opponents. Dangerous because it won't make exceptions, won't show mercy, won't recognize your experience or respect your fear. But trustworthy because it's consistent. It follows rules, patterns that can be learned and predicted. The same conditions produce the same results, always. A wave of given height and steepness will behave predictably. A current running at known speed will affect your vessel in calculable ways. This consistency allows expertise to develop. If the ocean were capricious, if waves behaved randomly, no amount of experience would help. But because the ocean follows physical laws, knowledge matters, skill accumulates, experience translates to capability. That indifference is part of the appeal. The ocean doesn't care about our achievements or our failures. It treats everyone the same, skilled or unskilled, famous or unknown, brave or foolhardy. Success depends on skill, preparation, and luck. There's honesty in that, a clarity that's harder to find in more complex human endeavors. The ocean's indifference creates a level playing field impossible to find elsewhere. On land, in human society, success often depends on factors beyond individual control. Who you know, where you were born, resources you inherit, luck of timing. The ocean cares about none of this. It treats the heir to fortune exactly the same as the self-taught sailor. What matters is whether you know your craft. Can you read weather, handle your vessel in storms, navigate accurately, Make good decisions under pressure. Your diplomas and bank accounts mean nothing if you don't know how to reef a sail properly or estimate drift in the current. This brutal honesty appeals to certain temperaments, people who want to be judged by their capabilities rather than their credentials, who prefer challenges with clear right answers rather than political or social complications. The ocean doesn't lie, doesn't flatter, doesn't care about your reputation. It simply is. And that simple being, that fundamental honesty, offers clarity that more complex human environments can't provide. There is a Zen quality to oceanic indifference. The ocean will not applaud your success or mourn your failure. It will not remember you when you're gone. It follows its own cycles. Tides pulled by the moon, currents driven by wind and the planet's rotation, waves generated by storms thousands of miles away. These patterns existed billions of years before humans, will continue billions of years after we're extinct. We can ride these patterns, use them, work with them, but we cannot change them, cannot bend them to our will. This indifference is not cruelty. The ocean is not cruel. It simply is. And this isness, this absolute authenticity, offers a kind of clarity that more responsive environments cannot provide. On land, in cities, in human society, everything is mediated by human concerns, human judgments, human reactions. The ocean has none of this. It treats the greatest navigator and the rankest beginner exactly the same. It rewards skill and preparation, yes, but it doesn't care about reputation, wealth, or status. There is profound honesty in this. The ocean is perhaps the last truly honest environment left on Earth, a place where what matters is simply what is. The oceans have been crossed, the major routes charted, the depths explored, but exploration continues because there's always more to learn, always new questions to ask, always someone new who looks at the horizon and wonders what lies beyond. The drive to explore seems fundamental to human nature, and the ocean offers infinite variations on that theme, from solo circumnavigation to deep-sea biology, to understanding how currents affect global climate. Modern ocean science reveals how little we truly understand. We've mapped the ocean floor with satellites, yes, but the resolution is crude. We have better maps of Mars than of our own sea floor. We've identified thousands of species, but estimates suggest millions more remain undiscovered, particularly in the deep ocean, where every expedition finds creatures never before seen. We understand the major currents, but the ocean's circulation is enormously complex, with eddies and countercurrents and deep flows we're only beginning to comprehend. We know the ocean affects climate, but the mechanisms are intricate. How heat is stored and released, how carbon is absorbed and sequestered, how changing ocean chemistry affects marine ecosystems. Each answer generates new questions. Scientists who've spent careers studying the ocean speak of it with humility, aware that their knowledge, however extensive, barely scratches the surface of all there is to know. This endless frontier appeals to certain minds, people drawn to problems that can never be fully solved, questions that always lead to further questions, mysteries that deepen the more you study them. Every generation rediscovers the ocean. Children who have never seen it run to the waves with joy that feels ancient and new simultaneously. Teenagers on their first sailing trip experience wonder their ancestors felt millennia ago. Young adults planning their first ocean crossing feel the same mixture of excitement and fear that drove the first Polynesian navigators out beyond sight of land. The ocean does not grow old. It refreshes itself with every tide, renews itself with every generation of humans who discover it anew. This is why ocean stories endure. why we keep telling tales of voyages and explorations, why each generation produces its own sailor poets and navigator philosophers. The ocean is infinite not just in space but in its capacity to inspire, to challenge, to teach. There is always more to learn, always new ways to interact with water and wind and waves, always fresh perspectives on ancient patterns. The first voyage across any ocean is still happening. Somewhere right now, someone is looking at the horizon for the first time and wondering what lies beyond. In dreams of the ocean, time behaves strangely. You might sail for what feels like hours, checking the sun's position, feeling progress through the water. Yet when you look at your watch, only minutes have passed, or the opposite. You blink and suddenly it's dusk, the day gone in what seemed an instant. The ocean does this even in waking life, but dreams amplify the effect. You exist in ocean time, where days blend together, where the distinction between dawn and dusk matters less than the state of wind and waves, where calendar dates become abstractions, and only position and progress have meaning. In these dreams, you are sometimes on the deck of a ship, sometimes in the water itself, sometimes viewing the ocean from above like a bird. The perspective shifts without transition, the way perspectives do in dreams. You might be sailing a wooden canoe like ancient Polynesians, then find yourself on a modern yacht with GPS and radar. The vessels change, but the ocean remains constant, endless, blue, moving in patterns that seem both random and purposeful, both chaotic and ordered, exactly as it is in reality, but somehow more so, more essentially itself. Sleep well. The tide rises and falls. The waves continue their ancient rhythm. And somewhere, out on the vast blue, someone is sailing toward a horizon that never gets closer, pursuing something that can only be found far from shore, in the realm where sky and water meet, and the world reduces to essentials: wind, water, and the courage to keep going. The paradox of the horizon is that it moves as you move, maintaining constant distance. You can sail toward it forever and never reach it. It will always be approximately 3 miles away if you're standing on deck, slightly further if you climb the mast. Ancient sailors knew this intellectually, but felt it emotionally. The horizon as boundary you can never cross. The edge that stays ahead of you no matter how far you travel. Yet beyond that unreachable horizon lie destinations that can be reached. Islands, continents, harbors. The horizon is both real, it exists, you can see it. It affects what you can perceive. And illusion, it's not a physical thing, just a limitation of perspective. This dual nature makes it perfect metaphor for goals in general. Some destinations can be reached, specific places you can actually arrive at. But some goals are like the horizon itself. They move as you approach, always suggesting more beyond, never quite achievable, but somehow worth pursuing anyway. The ocean teaches both kinds of pursuit, the practical navigation toward real destinations, and the philosophical pursuit of horizons that retreat forever, both valuable, both essential to human nature. The rhythm of ocean is fundamentally different from the rhythm of land. On land, time is marked by sun and seasons, day and night, summer and winter, the growing season and the harvest. These rhythms are solar, based on Earth's movement around the sun. The ocean adds another rhythm. The tides, pulled by the moon, rising and falling twice daily in most places, independent of sun and seasons. Sailors learn to think in both time systems, solar time for navigation, lunar time for tides. The overlap creates complex patterns. Spring tides occur when sun and moon align, their gravitational pulls reinforcing each other. creating higher highs and lower lows. Neap tides occur when sun and moon are at right angles, their pulls partially cancelling, creating smaller tidal ranges. These patterns repeat monthly, but differently each month, because the moon's orbit is elliptical, bringing it sometimes closer to Earth, sometimes farther. A sailor planning a voyage must consider all these factors: time of day, time of year, phase of moon, position of moon in its orbit. The ocean demands attention to cycles layered upon cycles, rhythms within rhythms, a complexity that gives its own kind of order to those who learn to read it. Right now, somewhere on Earth's oceans, thousands of vessels are underway. Container ships carrying goods from factory to market, their crews working routine watches on voyages they've made dozens of times. Research vessels gathering data, oceanographers lowering instruments to measure currents and chemistry, fishing boats working the grounds where their captains know fish gather, cruise ships carrying tourists to tropical islands, naval vessels on patrol or exercise, private yachts crossing oceans for the challenge or the journey, and among all these, perhaps, a single-hander alone on a small boat, days from land in any direction, following a course toward a distant destination, managing sail and helm and navigation, living in the moment while dreams of landfall sustain them through storms and calms. These are the direct descendants of everyone who ever ventured beyond sight of shore, connected by choice across millennia, choosing to place themselves on the ocean despite its dangers, drawn by something that words struggle to capture. The ocean calls, some answer, and in answering, they become part of a tradition older than any nation, any language, any religion. The tradition of humans who look at water and see not a barrier but a pathway, not an obstacle but an invitation. Listen to the rhythm of waves. Even far from shore, even inland, you can imagine that sound. The rush of water advancing up sand, the hiss of retreat, the pause between, the eternal repetition. This rhythm is older than language, older than humanity, older than life itself. Water has been moving in waves for billions of years, will continue for billions more. We are brief visitors to this ancient rhythm, granted a few decades to listen, to learn, to perhaps venture out upon the water ourselves. And when we do, when we leave the shore and commit ourselves to the ocean's keeping, we join a tradition that stretches back to the first humans who looked at the horizon and wondered, that extends forward to future generations who will sail by methods we cannot imagine toward horizons we will never see. If you're still awake, you'll shortly find another midnight exploration waiting on your screen. Or you may choose a playlist to continue your journey through the night. If these stories have brought you peace, please consider liking, subscribing, or sharing your midnight reflections with us. Your support helps our community grow and allows us to reach other fellow explorers wishing to find their rest. So rest now. Let these stories of ocean voyaging settle into your consciousness like waves lapping at a beach. Dream of open water, of horizons that curve away forever, of depths where strange creatures glow in eternal darkness. The ocean was here before humans existed, will be here long after we're gone. It's patient, it's eternal, and it's always there for those who feel its call.